Right. So Randy Orton does not like NXT. Everybody who has followed wrestling even for a short amount of time know that Randy Orton is not only an asshole, but that he has been extremely critical of the independent wrestling style of NXT and of indie wrestling in general. So we have to start before we get into his whole thing with Tommaso Ciampa and all the other things that he's been talking about within the last couple of days, in June of 2020. We have to go back. So we have to go back to 2017. So this is May 2017. So Randy Orton is in Denmark for some, I guess SmackDown is doing a tour or whatever. And Rip Rogers, the old wrestler from, the 80s, I've seen him on Mid-South. I'm not that familiar with him, but a lot of people follow him on Twitter. He's a wealth of wrestling knowledge on Twitter. He's actually very good at that. But he tweeted out, he's a trainer now. So he tweeted out basically the script of every indie wrestling match, and Randy Orton retweeted it. So what did Rip Rogers tweet? He says, every indie match now, handshake, drawn out move exchange, this is awesome chant, strike exchange, dive, no sell indie strong style, dive, more strikes, no sells, dive, flippy floppy sequence, dive, hit everyone with each other's finisher, then Humpty Dumpty we all fall down, fight forever chant, rinse and repeat until every move is useless, it means nothing, dive, take unsafe shot that looks like shit and hurts like hell, then roll up finish, handshake and hug after the match, everyone gets hands raised, all these guys chant, go home, type on social media, thanking your opponents and the company for the match, and telling others they should book these guys, dive. So Randy Orton retweeted this and people got really upset. Randy, I don't know why they got upset, because Rip Rogers is from the 80s. Why would you think that this guy would not? But even though this style that Rip Rogers is talking about could not come from the Indies, it came from ECW. Like that was when you start seeing all of the fake exchanges where guys are just moving from each other's moves, or they're countering, all that, the initial countering that leads to the square up. All that stuff came from Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn. That was the first time I saw it anyway. Now, of course, in typical wrestling, you do your arm bar, and then the guy does his little twist and his Billy, he gets out of it. But the duck clothesline, duck kick, drop kick move, double drop kick together, and nobody hits each other, and then we all just ball our fists up and stare at one another while the crowd reacts. That shit came from the ECW. I'd never seen it anywhere before, but I haven't watched every wrestling show that ever existed, so I can't tell you. But to me, that shit came out of Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn. That was the first time I ever seen it happen. But, excuse me, I'm not surprised that anybody would criticize that style, because it's absolutely everywhere. And I think this was around the same time they Will Ospreay and Ricochet, their Power Ranger Mortal Kombat type of fight scene came up on the internet, and all they were doing was superhero poses and staring at each other after they had done 1,000 flips and not made any contact, which is incredibly horribly choreographed. But Randy Orton retweeted this, and people kind of got their eyebrows raised, because Randy Orton ain't Rip Rogers. Randy Orton is actually somebody that people watch on TV. Not saying that Rip Rogers isn't somebody that people watched on TV, but like I said, he wrestled in the 80s. He's not a prominent wrestling legend. And Randy Orton is kind of a guy who everybody knows, so people gave him shit about this. So Randy Orton would release his apology, which says, sorry to the indie marks, indie guys and old timers who do dives, took offense. Just having a drink and just having a good time over a few drinks in Denmark, closing the SmackDown Live tour while beating Raw and making over $5 million in the last 11 shows. Now I know to some that doesn't equate to a standing room only crowd of 150 people paying $8 at an armory somewhere, but in the big boy world, that's called putting asses in seats. So enjoy your flips, dives, and 20 super kicks per match. To each their own. I will go dive back into my 13th title win and get ready to flip when my bank account statement comes this month. Headlock. So obviously, this is a jab at people who say Randy Orton only do headlocks, and or he does extended headlocks, which he does. I mean, let's be real here. Randy Orton does extended headlock poses. But it makes sense. So Randy is, taking a shot at the indie wrestling. Some people, Bubba Ray Dudley for some reason decided to show himself diving, and people like Will Ospreay got offended. Who the fuck cares? But ultimately, it kind of made Randy Orton sort of the guy that in the WWE he's gonna speak out about not liking the style. And over the years, he has taken quite a few swipes at NXT, but none more prominent than his swipe recently after the NXT In Your House paper event, where Randy Orton tweeted on June the 8th, 2020, "Heard WWE NXT TakeOver In Your House was great. Slapping my legs for you guys. Sincerely. Leg slap. Hashtag leg slap." Okay, so Randy Orton has made fun of the repeated Canadian destroyers in matches before. Now he's getting after the thigh slapping. Now, the thigh slapping, everybody should be making fun of that. Okay, I don't see how you can watch this shit and not notice how guys are slapping their thighs on both NXT and AEW to such a great extent. And yes, there is happening on Raw and SmackDown too, because Aleister Black is a thigh slapping motherfucker. But there's a lot of thigh slaps going on in wrestling now. But it's very prominent in certain promotions, AEW and NXT being the top 1 and 2 thigh slap promotions in the world. So Tommaso Ciampa, who takes up a position as a locker room leader in NXT, again, an NXT legend, a guy who is never leaving, never going anywhere, he gets offended by Randy Orton. So he tweets out, "My daughter has been having trouble sleeping. Luckily, I found a remedy, Randy Orton matches. Better than NyQuil. Sincerely, hashtag an entire locker room who busted their asses." I have no problem with Tommaso Ciampa taking up for his locker room. That's what you're supposed to do. But Randy Orton is not really that guy. He's not really the guy that you jump out the window to respond to. But plus, it's bait. You already know that Randy Orton baits people to respond to shit like this, right? So Randy Orton responded, "Looks like I hurt the feelings of the self-appointed locker room leader of a wrestling school. Oh boy. Let me know what time leg slap, hashtag leg slap class, so I can take my game to the next level." Hold on, I gotta read that again. I'm sorry. This is why you don't take bait, okay? You don't take bait. You don't do it. You don't take bait. Okay, let me read it again. Okay. "Looks like I hurt the feelings of the self-appointed locker room leader of a wrestling school. Let me know what time hashtag leg slap class starts so I can take my game to the next level." All right, so in this tweet, we already know there's like 2 or 3 things. One, NXT hates being called developmental. They have been trying to fight the whole developmental tag for the last 2 or 3 years, especially since they've been on TV. They have really been fighting the development. Johnny Gargano has been doing it. Tommaso Ciampa has always been doing it. A lot of these guys really hate the whole developmental concept. They don't want to be seen as being developmental. They think they work just as hard as everybody else. It's sort of like the NCAA and the NFL, where, in the NCAA, technically it's amateur, but they play a real game. It's real football. You really get hit, you really get hurt, you really tear your ACL, but you're a student, at the same time. So there's this mixture of people who are ready to go to the pros, those seniors who are ready to go to the NFL the next year. And then there's a lot of people who are just starting out. And NXT is the same thing. It's the NCAA. And for every Tommaso Ciampa, there are 4 guys who probably have no business being signed to the WWE, who are on the WWE roster, who are probably just standing behind barricades clapping right now because they can't lift, they can't work out, they can't do anything. So is it fair to call it a wrestling school? I mean, you really don't have a choice, right? It is what it is. But I don't know why Tommaso Ciampa and all these guys are so argumentative about it. I mean, it's not like it's a bad thing. You're a highly paid trainer. Tommaso Ciampa worked in Ring of Honor before he came to WWE. And he probably works in some other places, but I first saw him in Ring of Honor. But he's not a guy that's being, he's not a student. You know, he's a guy who's been around for a while. He's got some history. He kind of wants that respect, and I can get that. You know, Johnny Gargano is also not a guy who was signed off the street and, you know, didn't know shit about wrestling. You know, a lot of these guys at the top of NXT are indie favorites who've been around for a long time. But like I said, it's like the NCAA. For every one of those, for every Adam Cole, there's a bunch of, I think the guy's name is Boa, the Chinese guy who they signed, who WWE signed, and now he's literally been doing nothing but working out. You know, there's a ton of those fucking guys. They let a lot of those people go during the pandemic, or they just kind of got rid of a lot of those indie. They let a lot of those guys go. A lot of those people who had no real experience and really weren't adding anything to the NXT brand. He got rid of them. And you know, Tainara Conti was one of them too. Like she had no wrestling experience when they hired her, and that was actually her point, was she couldn't get experience because they kept pushing people who were more experienced over her. But she was so bad, man. Like, Tainara Conti is hot, but she was so bad. She was so bad. And she does need to go away and learn and then come back. Because she'll still be hot in 4 or 5 years. She's only like 25. So she can go away for 2 or 3 years, go to the NWA, go somewhere else, learn more about the business, and then come back. Other people who are a little bit older, they don't have that option. But like I said, NXT is like the NCAA. There's a mixture of people who are ready for the big leagues and then people who aren't. And then oddly enough, there's an odd position where you have people like Finn Balor who've already moved up and then been brought back. So it's stupid. But Randy Orton's attack on, well, his conversation, let's say, about NXT did not stop there. So recently, he made a comment to, I think, 411 Mania. So I'm reading this from No DQ, and Randy Orton criticizes how NXT wrestlers work. Okay, this is going to be a lot, but I think that this is very important because this is pro wrestling stuff. So the NXT guys worry me because I see them doing such highly physical things during their matches. It's almost like they do so many impressive things, but those things are dangerous and they wear and tear on your career. I've been doing this 20 years, and I'll do it another decade. I just turned 40. My plan is to just keep going until my 50th birthday, and I think I would be able to do that, and I will be able to support my family for 30 years of wrestling under Vince McMahon because of the way I tell stories in the ring. The facial expressions, the little transitional things that you do on the fly, or you ad-lib, so to speak, during a match, those are the things that people remember. I watched a match the other day, and I'm not going to name names, and a lot of the NXT guys work like this, and it's just train wreck after train wreck after train wreck, and it's all very impressive, but when it's all said and done, and the match is over, I couldn't remember anything that happened because it was just movement. It was just car crashes. And when you see so much of that back to back, and you don't see how that affected the talent, meaning they didn't sell that move, or that move enough of a delay, or there wasn't enough of a delay between high spots that I was able to see facial expressions and see that, oh, this guy hurts. Oh, he hurt his neck on this spot, and he just tried to pick up the other guy because he couldn't, because his neck hurt. Oh, I think he's really hurt. You don't get to invest into these matches because there are just boom, 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 one thing after another. And even though it is highly physically impressive, I wouldn't be able to do that style. A lot of these things these guys do, I'm not capable of doing, but they're going to have very short careers. So this is very important because this is also very New Japan. And that's why I named my previous video on the New Japan Cut my very ignorant opinions on New Japan. Because New Japan works like this as well. It's unnecessarily physical. You got Kota Ibushi getting dropped on his head 40 times in a match. It's absolutely unnecessary. You got Naito falling on his head every week. You know, just guys dropping each other on their heads a lot, and there's very little selling. You know, in New Japan they sell a lot after the match, which is okay, I guess. But the New Japan style, of course, the Misawa, the Kenta Kobashi, and all that type of stuff, these guys would drop each other on their heads 400 times. And that style, because it became famous with Meltzer and all of those guys, that kind of became the go-to style on the indies. And so you start seeing that stuff on the independent scene all the time, where guys would just do like 400 Canadian destroyers and nobody has a chance to sell anything. You definitely don't get any facial expressions. You definitely don't get any conversation between the opponents. Where back in the day you would see things and it looked like it was wasted movement, but it was really telling a story. Like I remember in a match that I saw where Jeff Jarrett would take down his opponent and then he would slap him on the back of the head and then he would do his "Ain't I Great" pose and do his Tennessee strut, which I guess is different from the Ric Flair strut. But you would say like, why is he doing this? It's just him playing his character, but it's also telling the story of the match. Because I remember that clearly this match was against Razor Ramon, and I think this was the January 1995 match for the Intercontinental Championship. And it's crazy that I remembered that. Like, that's right off the top of my head. Is when people say, when Randy Orton was talking about doing things in the match that people remember. I remembered that. Not only because Jeff Jarrett did it a lot, but it told the story of the match that he was a better wrestler than Razor Ramon. So he was out wrestling him and then humiliating him as he out wrestled him. And I then remember a little bit later on that Shawn would do something similar to Jeff Jarrett, where he would take Jeff Jarrett down and he walked up Jeff Jarrett's back, and then Jarrett rolled out of the ring, and it was dope. Like, this is storytelling. You can see facials, you can see characters are being shown without there being 1,000 chops and 1,000 moves. Now, this style also became very popular. This consistent movement with Chris Benoit. Now, off the top of my head again, I know for a fact this is Raven. Raven said that Chris Benoit used to work his ass off, but that Chris Benoit was very very insecure with his personality. And because he didn't have much of a personality, he would overwork, which means that he would, when he didn't know what to do, he would continue to chop and continue to fight and continue to kick. And Raven would say he hated working with him because Benoit did not let things breathe. He smothered you like all the time. He really didn't allow you to do character stuff. And Raven would say, like, I'm a guy with literally like 3 moves. I do 3 things, and one of them is a hair flip. I hate working with this guy. For starters, Raven always complaining, but he complained about being chopped, that he didn't like chops and all that type of stuff. But he also said that his favorite part of the business is, being able to get a guy down for something simple like an arm drag or something, and being able to work it and work the crowd with your facial expressions and your body language and stuff like that. That's part of working. Where the Benoit mindset was, if I'm not doing something, then people are going to get bored, And that's kind of the mentality that kind of permeated through indie wrestling. As you see that constantly now. And maybe when people bring it to your attention, you will start looking and seeing it. But I see it all the time. I see it literally all the time. Guys do not take time to react, let the crowd react, or to react to the crowd. And this is what makes some people like Charlotte really good. Like, I criticize Charlotte heavily, but Charlotte actually takes time to let things breathe. She does 3 or 4 chops, and then she'll woo, and then, even though it's just mocking Ric Flair, obviously, she's just copying what Ric Flair does. But there's a reason for it. You don't just chop, 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 which makes sense in a real fight. If you got somebody in a corner in a real fight, you're not going to let them go, right? But this is wrestling. You're going to give them a chance to sell how many times you chop them. Let them slink into the corner a little bit. Let them hit the floor and roll around and all that type of stuff. That's the storytelling part of wrestling. And Raven was like, Benoit was not secure with that. He was not good at letting things breathe, and he needed to learn that. He hated working with him in WCW because Benoit was just a machine who just, was a meat grinder. That's what he did. He didn't know what to do. He would just chop meat. And the indies is like that now too, where there's just constant movement, constantly something happening. And you have that big picture. And I kind of have that criticism of the Young Bucks, where they do so many spots that you really only know it because they named it, right? So they have this flipping tombstone power driver, and it's like, why is that not the finish? But they have 100 fucking flippy moves that are not the finish, and they just have constant movement in their matches. But except, that one match where they had with, I think, Omega and Page, where they were given so much time that they took time to sell things and to let things breathe. But New Japan is big on that too. They very, very rarely let things breathe, especially in the closing segments. That's really where shit hits the fan when it comes to NXT, because this is the big problem with like Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole, is that they have what you might call a second gear, where the match is nearing its conclusion because, one, they speed up, two, they start doing far more devastating things and not selling it, and three, there's a bunch of fucking false finishes. Like when you see that shit happen and you know that you're full in indie territory, and guys do not give a fuck, and that makes matches hard to remember, because you might remember. And that's why I have troubles like remembering certain matches in New Japan, because all that shit runs together to me. It's like, okay, the Graps dude did Grap dude shit, and then he did a bunch of high spots, and then it kicked into high gear where, it started, flip-flopping and all over the place and all that type of shit. And it's like, whatever. But I can remember a spot between Jeff Jarrett and Razor Ramon from 1995. I can remember off the top of my head. But, maybe it's just me and my personal taste, and Randy Orton and his personal taste. But I think that if you look at the outcomes, I think that the facts speak out for what is actually what actually makes sense. And yes, I do believe that you can work too slow, and I do think Randy Orton works a little too slow. So, I mean, yeah, you can take it to both extremes, where you can work. You can do little to nothing in a match. Kevin Nash is another one who did little to nothing in a match. Like, Nash really only had 3 spots. Okay, he had the foot in the throat in the corner, which he did. He also do his elbows in the corner, and he would spend a lot of the match posing and doing those forearm shivers, and that's it. And then he had the powerbomb. That was it. That's a complete Kevin Nash match. You want to know how Kevin Nash worked for 10 years? That's it. Okay, he got you in the corner. He did the back elbow in the corner. He did the foot stretch thing in the corner, and that was pretty much it. He might have did a side slam in a match. Maybe not. He did some hair flips, and that was it. That was Kevin Nash's entire career, is selling personality when he finally found one. So we can just go through this over and over again. Like, it's not always constant movement, and you don't have to choreograph your match out to such a degree that I know that Steamboat claims that Randy Savage used to script his entire match out from beginning to end, and he was presented with a script at WrestleMania 3 about about what we're going to do, and that Randy Savage was very intent on keeping to the script, and then he taught that to DDP, and DDP then worked off of a script. And that makes sense, because if you see I think DDP and Sting only had 2 matches together. They're almost exactly the same match. So you should, so if you, and I don't know why that would be, but if you watch those 2 matches, I think they both were on Nitro. One of them was when DDP was a babyface. The other was when DDP was a heel. It's pretty much the exact same match. Okay? And I think it ended the same way. I think the finish came about the exact same way too. It's almost the exact same match, because dudes are scripting their matches out to model after what they know works, but they're also just doing something. They're not listening to the crowd. They're not really responding. Even though DDP was really good at crowd reaction and going back and forth, he scripted his matches out to the point where there was no room for error. And sometimes you have those problems where you script your match out to the point where there's no room for error, but you also cut out the room for letting things breathe. And I think that's really what Randy Orton's trying to get to. And that's really one of my problems. Like, if you want to script the match out, at least let it, almost all of this shit is choreographed anyway, but at least give it an opportunity for people to take in what you're doing and why you're doing it, and tell the story of what you're doing, because it's a 2-person job. The one person is attacking, the other person is selling. You have to give the other person a chance to sell. And that's what Randy Orton is talking about directly, is we don't get the chance to see people selling, which is part of the business, right? that's the most important part of the business, because, you know, if a guy's hurt, he needs to be able to, you know, people invest in this guy's injury. But what do you guys think? Let me know. I'm talking too much. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.